Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Kolpack and Izzo Podcast, brought to you by Gate City Bank. Jeff Kolpack is off this week, and we're not, no slout here, no slight, and no going to the bullpen. We bring in the one and only Big E, Eric Peterson, to join us on the pod this weekend to preview Eastern Washington and North Dakota State, set to open up the FCS Playoffs tomorrow at Gate City Bank Field at the Fargodome with a 2:30 kickoff. The winner moving on to the quarterfinals of this playoff. Big E, it's great to see you. We're FCS playoff time at the end of April, which is bizarre, and this game being in the first round is bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a matchup on heavyweights, but going into this game, it's weird just because of the way it's played out. No cross-conference matchups, or at least not many. You know, Eastern Washington has played 6 games. NDSU has played 8 games, and one of them was in the fall. It's just hard to get a read on these teams, especially Eastern Washington. Yeah. They haven't played the high-end opponents in the Big Sky because the Montana schools both opted out. They didn't play Weber State. So it's just the mixed bag of we don't know what's going on. I feel that's what this spring is, and that's why maybe there's going to be some big surprises in this first round because maybe we just don't know enough about these teams just because of they haven't played, like I said, among different conferences, and some of them haven't played the top teams within their own conference.
Eastern Washington, as you mentioned, hasn't played in a couple weeks. They had a built-in bye after the end of the regular season with a win over Idaho. We think we know about Eric Barrier. Obviously, Bison fans remember him from the 2019 title game, was a pretty green quarterback then. Aaron Best says he's bigger. His arm is better. I'm curious what we're going to see out of him. He's elusive. We know that. Nothing's changed from that from a couple years ago.
Well, I think what we do know heading into this is Eastern Washington, Eric Barrier is very talented. He's a dual threat quarterback, the type of quarterback that can give an NDSU defense fits. And Eastern Washington's going to have very talented wide receivers. And they also have a good running back. So I think offensively that's going to be a big challenge for North Dakota State. What we don't really know is what Eastern Washington is going to bring defensively. 2 of their top 3 linebackers are gone. Their front, their defensive front is young with a few freshmen. So, and then again, that's where Eastern Washington's played Idaho twice, Idaho State, Cal Poly, UC Davis. So
right.
I don't know. What do we know? But I think it comes down to this, and we were talking off air before we started this podcast. If you want to look at one thing, to me, obviously slowing down Eastern Washington's passing game is huge. NDSU running the ball is huge. But the turnover battle is going to be massive in this game. One, because NDSU has been -8 this spring, which is not good.
No.
That's not good for a team that went, I guess, 5-2 in the spring. We'll throw out the fall game. So that you usually don't go 5-2 when you're -8.
Nope.
But we're looking through the Eastern Washington notes, and we can give a shout out to Dave Cook, the sports information Eastern Washington. Since 2010, Eastern Washington is 58-0 when winning the turnover battle.
Man,
let me repeat that: 58-0. So if North Dakota State does not win the turnover battle in this game, it could be quite the uphill battle to find a way to win this game.
On the flip side, too, Eastern has not played a road playoff game since 2009, since the turf came in, since the red turf. They've been at home every single time. And you and I have talked about it. They've had Golden Pass to Frisco and seen Sam Houston come up there and win, Towson win, Youngstown come up there and win. So I am curious. I know those are all different teams. Them going on the road for a playoff game because they just haven't had to do it. They've never had to do this.
The flip side or the caveat, and you obviously know this, is you're going on the road in the COVID era.
Yep.
25% capacity, 4,500 people in the dome, even
maybe
if they're able to get 4,500.
I don't even know. Right.
I mean, let's just say there's 4,000 people there. I mean, they'll make some noise, but it's not going to be ear-splitting. Eastern Washington's going to be able to change plays at the line of scrimmage. So other than the travel part of it, I just don't know if being at home or on the road is going to matter as much in this spring season as it normally would, especially in places like James Madison, NDSU, places like that where in the past they've had large crowds. Now, again, you'd rather play at home. Don't get me wrong. You'd rather play at home. You'd rather not travel. There is still some inherent advantage on that. But as far as once the game starts, you're not going to have the crowd getting behind a defense or the crowd, creating false starts or not allowing you to change plays at the line of scrimmage if you're not the Eastern Washington offense.
All right, let's get this out of the way. Who's starting for the Bison tomorrow at quarterback?
Well, I went back and forth on it, but to me, it doesn't matter who starts. To me, it matters who plays more snaps and who finishes. I know
that's probably
Cam
Matt.
Miller
You know what? That's probably Matt Entz's line of thinking too. Now that you say that, you're probably right.
Yeah. I mean, Zeb Nolan started again against SDSU, but Cam Miller quarterbacked the entire game.
Yep.
So, I mean, whether we see Zeb Nolan as an opener or Cam Miller as an opener, me personally, I think they might start Cam Miller, but maybe they're like, you know what? It's the first playoff game. We don't want to put it on Cam Miller, like thinking, all right, I'm finally starting a playoff game. Maybe they feel like he's been more successful when you just inject him into the game instead of him having to come out from the go time and make it run. But I just think NDSU is going to have to control the ball. NDSU is going to have to run the ball. And to me, that all points to Cam Miller.
I look at no, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially being a little light in the running back room. You don't know if Kobe Johnson's going to play. He probably won't play.
I don't think he's playing. No.
Jalen Bussey is the guy who could return. But say Jalen Bussey doesn't return or is a game-time decision, you're still leaning on Hunter Lupke and Dominic Ganella. So Cam Miller almost becomes your third running back. I don't know if you want to throw TK Marshall into the fire right away.
Right.
So if NDSU is going to have to control the ball, time of possession, I think that lends itself more to Cam Miller than Zeb Nolan.
I think you said this with Mike on the postgame show. Offense wasn't the issue last week. I thought that was the best quarterback game they got out of the spring. It was the defense, and that leads me to the biggest point. If James Kaiser can't play and he's battling a groin injury, and that's not something you just come back from in 5 days, in my mind, of covering this game, and you have as longer than I have, that's a major issue.
Especially against a team. It's not like it's a running team where he's just going to have to go straight forward.
Right, they're going all over the place. He's going to be
running all over the place. So not only the injury, but the type of team they're playing. And if Eastern Washington, clocks 75, 80, 85 plays, then that even lends itself less to trying to have James Kaiser come back from an injury like that.
Watching the game up close, like I was, and you were at home watching, it just was stunning that they couldn't wrap anybody up. And that we've then seen that before, the Bison defensively last week. And I don't know how you fix that in 5 days to be just better at tackling, because Pierre Strong, Davis, Gronowski, all of them just got loose.
And the crazy thing going into it, you were more worried about the secondary. You're like, Josh Hayes is out. They're young there. Courtney Eubanks is going to see more time. I mean, SDSU made a few plays through the air, but most of their damage was on the ground. And even their passing plays, most of the damage were just checkdowns to the running back. And that's why another thing, Eastern Washington, I'll be interested to see if they want to throw those dump downs to Tamarick Pierce and some of their running backs. That's another thing that NDSU has to look forward to be concerned about. I guess the one thing, if Kaiser doesn't play, the style of game that Eastern Washington plays, does Dawson Weber play outside linebacker? Does Michael Tutsi play outside linebacker? Almost the way that James Kaiser played safety, and when they played passing teams, he got moved outside linebacker and eventually made the transition. But I look at NDSU safeties, I see Dom Jones, I see Michael Tutsi, I see Dawson Weber. They're all really good players. If James Kaiser can't play or is compromised, I think you find a way to get all three of those guys on the field. So whether it's Dawson Weber or whoever, I don't know who fits better that outside linebacker mold. Maybe that's what you see. You see one of those safeties slide down to outside linebacker, then you can keep Talbert and Jaden Price starting at the corners, and I guess Courtney Eubanks becomes your nickel corner at that point. And even, I guess, if Dawson Weber's playing outside linebacker, maybe he is your nickel corner and outside linebacker.
I know how much you pay attention to offensive line, and the injury to Gray Zabel is substantial, obviously, because Zabel had been playing so well, and now we put Zach Kubas back in there, and it is what it is, but this is obviously the biggest thing I'm watching tomorrow is how much push they actually can get up front, because it didn't seem, once Zabel left, I thought that went away. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there was spurts where they had a chance, and I thought South Dakota State did a good job. They didn't shut down the running game. There was still 3, 4, 5 yards of crack, but they never let NDSU
There's no biggies.
rip off.
No.
They had one +10 rush, and that was the 13-yard touchdown by Cam Miller.
Wow.
South Dakota State really limited the explosive running plays. And I think Matt Entz kind of gave you an answer how they're going to attack this. They're not going to play just 5 guys. If, Kubis gets the start, he brought up Mason Miller's name. Does he get kicked inside? He brought up Zach Willis is another guy. You're going to play the 2 tight ends and make the line of scrimmage 7 people wide, much like they did against UND. You start throwing more of those tight ends in the backfield. And I think to get their running game going, they're going to get creative, and they have a lot of big bodies that necessarily aren't offensive linemen. I think that's how they're going to find a way to attack this. And the flip side is Eastern Washington's front as good as South Dakota State's. They didn't get the push against South Dakota State, but South Dakota State has a pretty good front. Right. They have some veterans there. They have some big bodies there. I don't know if Eastern Washington quite has that personnel. So if NDSU can find a way to get more of a push than they did the week before against South Dakota State, I still think there's some running lanes to be found there.
Everybody keeps asking me, and I'm sure you've been asked this as well, what's up with the tight ends? Why can't they get the tight ends the ball more? You're the great offensive mind of the two of us. Can you answer that? How do they do that? To get it to Babbage, to get it to Gindorf more?
I mean, without like breaking down film, I don't know if they're like getting doubled or and part of it, maybe they're being asked to help block more, just to help the offensive line. Maybe they're not getting on the patterns, but Nora Gindorf did have a big catch.
There's a good throw by Miller too.
SDSU, a good back shoulder fade throw. Babbage has had a few. The thing I encounter is NDSU's played 2 games since March 20th. We act like they've played 5 or 6 games. You know what I mean? Well, there just hasn't been that many games in there, and I get it. But I will say this too. Christian Watson got the ball, or at least they went.
They tried to get him the ball.
Forward. Yep. And he was inches away from a pretty big play where he stepped on the sideline. Braylon Henderson got involved. So to me, the passing game is efficient, whether the tight ends are catching it, whether it's Braylon Henderson, whether it's Christian Watson.
Or the running backs, right.
Yeah. Until it got to desperation mode at the end, I think Miller was like 9 of 13 or 4. He had a pretty good pass percentage. He was pretty efficient. So I just think regardless of who catches it, you want to be in that 60 to 65% completion percentage. And sometimes the tight end's value might be in blocking. So I get it. You'd love to see Noah Gindorf, catch a few more touchdowns, or Josh Babbage, that quick slant we saw last year against Western Illinois, turn on the Jets. But NDSU's offense just is in a different place than it was last year, where that offensive line probably didn't need as much help in making sure, the quarterback was safe, or maybe even helping in the run game.
This is a total coin flip game to me. Is it to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's totally go either way.
I think a lot of these are coin flip games. I just don't know how much we know about any of these teams. I mean, we have a good idea, but James Madison's the number 1 seed. What do we know about him? I mean,
3 seed. 3. They're the 3.
The number 3 seed.
Yep.
What do we know?
You're
about
right.
Them?
We don't.
They were ranked number 1
right.
in the 3 seed. We think they're pretty good, but if you just look at its resume, I mean, they ended the year with a nice win, but was it Robert Morris and
Morehead State? Yep.
And then they played Elon,
William and Mary. Yep.
I mean, and I'm not. It's no fault of James Madison, but that's where we're at with this spring season. There's just so much variance on who played the top teams. I guess the one thing you could say about NDSU, they played Missouri State, they played UND, they played SDSU, they played Southern Illinois. So at least they played the teams we think are good.
Yeah, right.
And you look back to it, maybe the Southern Illinois game against Southeast Louisiana was the thing that helped the Valley, because that was one of the few cross-conference games that happened. Southeast Louisiana was the number 2 team in the Southland, and then they gave up 55 points on the road at Southern Illinois. So it's a coin flip game, because I just don't know how good NDSU's defense is going to respond after last weekend.
Is there
especially?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to especially with the secondary we think's a little short
Right.
without Josh Hayes there. And against a team that has 3, 4, potentially 5 pretty good targets for Eric Berry to throw to.
Is there a sleeper team in the field of 16 that could make a run to the semifinals that we're not talking about right now?
To me, it's hard to call someone a sleeper when there's 16 teams. I mean, they're all relatively good, and with 6 at-larges and the limited automatic bids, I don't think there's as many teams that aren't as good as the 24-team bracket had. I know I think you had Sam Herder on your Hot Mic show today. He brought up Delaware. I think Delaware is a good team, but would it be a surprise if Delaware made a run? They haven't lost this year. They've had pretty good quarterback play. They come from a power. To me, like, what team would have to, like, if Monmouth
is the one, right? If they were to beat Sam Houston,
sleeper.
if they were to go and beat Sam Houston, that would, I mean, they have playoff experience. I know they don't have Pete Guerrero anymore, but that's a team against, I know Sam Houston is really good, but that's a show me team. They've got to show it tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, Sam Houston's almost become like the and James Jackson will say, they've almost become the Milwaukee Bucks of the FCS. They can have great regular season after
Which they
great
do.
regular season. But now, Jacksonville State made that run to the national championship a few years back. Since then, they haven't really done much in the playoffs. Sam Houston's had a few mediocre runs of late, or decent runs of late, but since the Willie Fritz era, they haven't really been, Frisco run type team. So I think this is a prove it year for those teams in the spring season, what they can do. But is there other than, like, if SDSU lost, I still think it'd be a pretty big shock if Sam Houston, and Richmond, James Madison, would there be any first round matchup if a team lost where you'd be like, that's shocking?
No, those are the teams, and
so.
Delaware. If Sacred Heart would have beat Delaware, that would blow me away of those teams.
Yeah,
I think
there was only a handful of matchups. Like, if NDSU loses to Eastern Washington, I wouldn't be shocked.
Not at all. Nope. I think they're the two games that stand out to me outside of the Bison game to watch tomorrow, the UND game and the Weber SIU game. Which of those two intrigues you more?
I think the Weber State one's intriguing because Weber State didn't lose. They won the automatic bid from the Big Sky. And I don't know what to think of Southern Illinois. 1 week they not blow the doors off of NDSU, then South Dakota State
blows the doors off them. Right.
Then they get this last game against Southeast Louisiana, and they at least seem to find their offense again and put up 55 points. Granted, they gave up a lot of points in that game.
They gave up 48.
Southern Illinois is kind of an enigma. And then, but Weber State, I don't know what to think of them either because they've won on a Hail Mary.
Yep.
They've won a lot. I mean, I know that's the way they play. They play low possession games. They try to make it low scoring. They muck it up. They want to run the ball control, but to me, that's an intriguing game. And like you said, UND, Missouri State, the game that was on again, off again, on again, off again, finally is on again. And that's another thing. If Missouri State and UND would have played in that makeup week, and they didn't just because of the way the COVID cancellations happened, that UND was supposed to play Youngstown, which ended up not happening. But that could have, one of those teams would have likely been knocked from the playoffs.
Correct.
If they would have played in the final game of the regular season. So to me, that's intriguing because UND hasn't played forever. I mean, March 20th, the last time they played was
the Bison
NDSU.
Game, right.
And Missouri State has seemed to play better as the years gone on. They've played more recently. They've played more regularly. But, they're like NDSU, who we don't know who their quarterback's going to be, and they've had some ups and downs offensively as well. But I think the one thing about Missouri State, their defense has been pretty solid throughout the year, and especially as the season went along. I think you're seeing some of the transfers like Monte Braswell. Kevin Ellis wasn't a transfer, but their defensive end. I think they got some pretty good players on defense. So I think it's going to be, can Missouri State, and we say this every time UND plays, can they control Otis Weah? I mean, Otis Weah is he is the difference maker in that UND offense. And if he gets loose and goes for 100 to 150, UND is going to be in great shape. Missouri State finds a way to slow Otis Weah down. It's going to be a coin flip game there as well.
We usually talk all college football topics on this pod, and before we wrap, I do want to get your thoughts on this because I know how you feel about it, that ESPN and a couple other outlets reporting that the College Football Playoff Management Committee met this week, had several different proposals about expansion. They talked 6, 8, 10, 12, and 16. This is the first time, I can remember, and maybe you remember something different, that they've actually put out different models of teams. They said we've talked about it, but never had an exact model of teams. This is progress to me. I think somehow they got to get to 8. If it's 2 years from now, outstanding. But this is something that's needed, even if it's still 8 Power 5 teams, which I'm still convinced they'll probably do because they like to consolidate that and not give the group of 5 a shot. This is a step in the right direction. What do you think?
Well, it's pretty obvious. This is not obvious, but could this be COVID related? Like they want money?
They always want money. They always want money.
What I'm saying, maybe they're to the point like, you know what? If we make an 18 playoff, the money we lost over the pandemic, maybe we'll get back. To me, the number's 8. You go with the 5 conference champions of the Power 5 teams. So every team in the Power 5
is in.
Cannot complain,
right?
Because you know what? Your conference, if you want to get in, win your conference championship, you cannot complain. You at the start of the year, every single team in those Power 5 conferences has, I mean, in theory, has a chance. Yep. Obviously, the teams that aren't very good literally don't.
No, I get what you're saying. Yep.
You can't complain. Then you leave it at 3 at-larges, and I don't know if you want to mandate that one of them goes to a group of 5, so it isn't like 5 conference winners and 3 SEC teams or 2 SEC and 1 Big Ten.
You know that's what they'll do.
But, I mean, that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, we've seen when Alabama's won it and Georgia and LSU are sitting there like, well, wait a minute. Why would you throw Central Florida in here when our only loss is to Alabama?
Correct.
You know? So yep. I get it. But I like 8 because it does give you a chance if there's a Central Florida. And maybe I don't know if there's every year there's a group of 5 worthy of it. But most years there's usually one.
If they were to do this, if they were to do this, right, and considering if NDSU and the FBS talk, right, if Boise State then opts for the American, this makes that all the more intriguing because then there will be a spot if they were to do that with 8 and guarantee a group of 5 team would go. Boy, there's that caveat out there too, for NDSU fans say, well, okay, we can hop on board with moving up to FBS then.
Yeah, to me, like you said, though, it's going to be hard. If it becomes 8, it's going to be hard to say you have to have a group of 5.
I agree.
In there because the Power 5 is going to go like, wait a minute. All right, we run. They're writing the big checks for our conferences, not for the group of 5. No offense.
So no, but you made the best point though. Normally, the second place team in the SEC has 1 loss majority of the time, and that's to the team that wins it. To say, well, wait a minute, we should be in it. And not Boise State, not Cincinnati, not Central Florida, because our only loss is to the team that's playing for the whole thing.
So I think it gets to 8 and it's 5, the 5 conference champions and 3 at-larges. I don't know if they get to a point where they say there has to be a group of 5. I'm sure they'll like sell it as, hey, there's 3 at-larges, group of 5, you have a chance to get it, which I don't know how often that'll happen, but I don't know if you want to go beyond 8. I mean, everyone likes 16. I
don't like 16. That's too many.
There's not that many.
Yeah. How many teams? How many teams realistically win it? Right? How many 8 to 10? Right, that have a chance to win it every year, and that's probably too many.
And you'll play all these games, and it'll end up being the same 3 or 4 at the end anyway. I mean, really. I mean, it'll probably still be Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. There might be, and if you go to 16, that even makes it harder for a group of 5 to win. You're really going to win 4 games to win a national championship. If it's 8 and you say it's 8 and you're like a group of 5 and you get Alabama in the first round. Well, if you upset Alabama, you're in the semis and then you have a puncher's chance. But at 16,
no way.
Are you really going to win 4 games in a row if you're Central Florida against Power 5 type teams? That just ain't going to happen. No. I think 8 is good, especially since if you're going to, I mean, you already have kind of a playoff built in. These conference championships are already a level of playoff games. So I would almost argue like the first round of playoffs is the conference championships. And then 8 and beyond is like beyond that. So your round of 16 is really the conference championships, because the group of 5 conference championships are going to mean something too, because I would assume you'd have to win your group of 5 conference
to get in there, right?
To be taken seriously to make 8 teams. So I like 8, where you have the 5 automatic bids, 3 at large, and I don't think it needs to go beyond that.
We'll see. Hopefully, we'll have a resolution on that sometime before all of our hairs turn gray on this. This was great. Thanks for filling in, my man. We'll see you tomorrow on our pregame show.
All right. Well, Dom, you better make it spicy, because this might be our last, and hopefully our only spring season that we'll ever have to cover. But
we'll be ready to rock.
All right. Sounds good.
Big E filling in for Jeff Kolpack this week. That's the latest edition of the Kolpack and Izzo podcast. If you missed any of our previous shows, you can download them at inforum.com or Apple iTunes. We'll see everybody at the game on Saturday.